The studio was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes just before lightning strikes. Across from Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, sat Emmanuel Bako, one of the country's boldest journalists. A man known for cutting through politicians like a razor through silk. His lips were dry, but his voice was sharp. "Mr. President," Bako began, "why are you silencing democracy in the name of security? Why are foreign soldiers disappearing, and why do people whisper your name in fear?" The question echoed through the studio. Cameras were rolling. Thousands were watching live. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his eyes not angry, but tired. Tired like a man who has carried too many secrets for too long. The lights above flickered just slightly. You could almost feel his heartbeat through the screen. Bako leaned in, sensing weakness. "Are you just another military man pretending to be a savior?" Everyone thought Traoré would lash out. Instead, he smiled faintly. Then he whispered. And in that moment, everything changed. But what did he say? You couldn't hear it on TV. His microphone had fallen just below his collar. But the cameras caught the journalist's face. He froze. His brows tightened. His jaw fell open. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Pain. Shock. Regret. The whole world saw Emmanuel Bako slowly pull back and lower his voice. Traoré sat still, his fingers laced in front of him like a man in prayer. For the first time, Bako didn't have another question. For 8 seconds, both men sat in silence. Then, with a trembling voice, Bako said quietly, "I didn't know that about your mother." The control room didn't know what to do. No one expected a live political face-off to become this personal. Phones buzzed, comments exploded. What did he say? What about his mother? Is this staged? But it wasn't. Because deep in the village of Zignare, far from cameras, an old woman once made a sacrifice that shaped a boy into a man who would one day carry a nation on his back. The whisper wasn't strategy. It was truth. And truth, in its purest form, is powerful. Years before the cameras, before the fame, and before he wore military boots, Ibrahim was just a boy. Zignare wasn't kind to poor children. When rain came, it flooded the homes. When the sun returned, it cracked the earth. Families fed on hope and hard work, when either was available. His mother, Awa Traoré, was the strongest woman in the village. She didn't have much, but she had something rare: courage. She used to say, "A leader is someone who cries when others are hungry, and eats last." When Ibrahim was 9, there was a drought. One night, Awa returned home with only a handful of grain. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She gave it to Ibrahim and said, "Eat. You will lead people one day. I need you strong." He cried as he ate. He didn't know that would be her last meal. The next morning, she didn't wake up. Years later, that same boy sat in a presidential seat and whispered that story to a journalist who thought he knew everything. And for the first time, Bako felt something stronger than pride. He felt shame. But the story was just beginning. After his mother passed, Ibrahim didn't cry for long. Not because he didn't feel it, but because there was no time to feel. At just 9 years old, he took her place in the fields, planting in dry soil, hauling water with cracked hands, and sleeping on a mat that still smelled like her. He worked harder than boys twice his age. He didn't speak much, but when he did, even elders paused to listen. At 15, he left Zignare with a single change of clothes and a pair of rubber boots too big for his feet. The soles were nearly gone. People laughed at him at the military academy in Ouagadougou. One cadet once asked, "Are you here to fight or to farm?" Ibrahim didn't answer. He just trained harder. At night, while others slept, he wrote in a small brown notebook. No one knew what was inside, but every page began the same way. For Awa, I will build the country you dreamed of. On live TV years later, when the journalist pressed him about his lust for power, he wasn't hearing accusations. He was hearing his mother's voice. The journalist didn't stop. Why did you dissolve Parliament? Why are you refusing to hold elections? Where is the democracy you promised? Each question stabbed deeper than the last. But what the world didn't know, what Ibrahim had never said on camera, was that elections couldn't happen because his people were being hunted like animals. In a dusty village near Kongusi, a woman named Salimata lost her husband and 2 sons in one night. Not to war, but to terror. Gunmen entered the village after sundown. They didn't ask who voted. They didn't care who supported the government. They lined up men and boys, and then they opened fire. The next morning, Ibrahim flew there. No media, no military parade, just him, and 42 graves. Salimata threw herself at his feet, clutching his boots, the same kind his mother once gave him. She didn't ask for justice. She asked, "Will they come back tonight?" He didn't have an answer. That night in his hotel room, he cried for the first time in 12 years. Not as a president, not as a soldier, but as a son, a brother, a man failing to stop the pain. The studio lights were still burning bright. The audience, live online, had no idea what was unraveling beneath the surface. Bako, the fierce journalist, was losing his fire. His voice shook. I didn't know that happened in Kongusi, he said quietly, eyes cast down. We weren't allowed to report on it. Traoré nodded once. Then, softly, he whispered again. This time, the camera caught it. You're not my enemy, Bako. Our enemy wears no uniform. He burned school, not ballots. The entire room changed. The control room stopped switching angles. The producer lowered the background music. And the chat section of the live stream exploded with crying emojis, flags, and Bako looked stunned. His tough, polished face suddenly looked very human. He took off his glasses. His eyes were red. You lost your mother. I lost my brother. He was a teacher. They shot him in front of his students. And just like that, 2 men on opposite sides of a screen became 2 survivors of the same war. There was no victory in that moment, only shared sorrow. But for the first time, it felt like truth might win. Shall I continue with chapters 7 to 9? We're just getting to the emotional core. The world often sees leaders in suits behind microphones. What they don't see is what they carry. After the Kongusi massacre, Ibrahim Traoré didn't sleep for 2 nights. His military advisors urged him to stay in the capital, to avoid being emotional. But he refused. He returned to the region in secret. No press, no army, just him. He stood alone at a mass grave under the blistering sun, reading the names written in charcoal on wooden boards. Isa, 11 years old. Khadija, 7. Mamadou, 16. Then he met a little girl named Rokia, hiding under a table in what used to be her school. She couldn't speak. Not because she was shy, but because the explosion that killed her classmates had damaged her hearing. He carried her to the nearest hospital himself, wrapped in his jacket. Back in the studio, Bako's voice grew softer. Mr. President, how do you sleep at night? Ibrahim looked down for the first time. I don't, he replied. Suddenly, the internet stopped laughing. This wasn't a dictator's interview anymore. It was a man haunted by the weight of his people's suffering. Bako had spent 10 years exposing lies. He had faced threats, censorship, and exile. But today, sitting across from a man the world painted as a military strongman, he felt something he hadn't expected: guilt. Not because of the questions. They were necessary. But because in all his research, He never looked into who Ibrahim was before the uniform. He stared at Traoré and said, "They say you hate journalists." Traoré paused, then with a tired smile answered, "My father was one." Silence. Bako froze. He hadn't read that anywhere. "He ran a small newspaper in Zinyaré," Traoré continued. "They burned it down when he reported on corruption. They called him a traitor. He died 3 months later from stress." Bako swallowed hard. I didn't know." "Most don't," Traoré said. "They think the uniform came first, but before I carried a weapon, I carried a camera. I used to take photos for his paper." And just like that, the story changed. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was legacy. It was memory. And for Bako, the fire in his chest wasn't anger anymore. It was mourning. Before the commercial break, the camera caught something strange. President Traoré reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn brown notebook. The corners were frayed. The spine was nearly torn. "Every time I lose a village," he said, holding it up, "I write down the names. Not the numbers, not the stats, the names." He flipped the pages. They were full. Hundreds of names, written in black ink, in tiny, careful handwriting. "Some presidents collect medals," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I collect reminders." He pushed the notebook toward Bako. "Pick a page," he said. "Read any name." Bako hesitated. Then he turned to a random page and read aloud. "Adama Diallo, 14. Shot while protecting his younger sister." He couldn't continue. The studio was silent. Even the crew had tears in their eyes. In that moment, no one saw a soldier. No one saw a politician. They saw a man who wrote every death down like a prayer, so they would never be forgotten. And for the first time in years, Bako whispered, "Maybe we've been asking the wrong questions." It happened in a single moment, yet it changed everything. Bako leaned in one last time, ready to deliver the final sharp question. "President Traoré, are you just another strongman clinging to power?" But before he could finish, Traoré did something unexpected. He leaned forward slowly, calmly, until the microphones couldn't pick up his words. He whispered, "If I fall, France gets the gold. If I rise, the children get a future. Which side are you on, really?" Bako blinked. For a moment, the whole studio felt cold. Still, he didn't respond. He couldn't. Because the truth behind those 17 words hit harder than any headline. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even strategy. It was a burden, spoken by a man trapped between foreign powers and a nation bleeding from every corner. Traoré leaned back, straightened his jacket, and calmly looked into the camera. "For those watching, this is not about me. This is about whether your children eat or watch foreign trucks drive past them with everything we own." Silence. Twitter exploded. People across the continent didn't just watch, they felt it. And many for the first time cried for Burkina Faso. The next day, a video surfaced online. It wasn't from the government. It came from Gungin, a tiny village once ravaged by terror attacks and forgotten by media. The clip showed a group of children, barefoot and smiling, holding up cardboard signs scribbled with charcoal. "We heard him. We believe him. Tell him we are still here." One sign stood taller than the rest. It read, "We are not just numbers." That moment, raw and simple, went viral in seconds. People from South Africa to Senegal began sharing their own signs, their own losses, their own silent screams. Parents who had lost sons to bandits, young people whose schools had closed, nurses who had no gloves, but still saved lives. All saying the same thing: "We are still here." Bako saw the clip before going live again the next night. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just played the video. Tears welled in his eyes. Not from defeat, but from truth finally cutting through the noise. "I thought this was about politics," he said, "but it's about people." 2 days after the broadcast, Traoré visited an outpost near Wahiguya. There he met a young soldier named Abdoulaye, just 17, who had joined the army after losing his entire family in an ambush. Abdoulaye stood tall in patched fatigues and, most shockingly, tin shoes made from old cooking pots. Traoré knelt beside him and asked softly, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" The boy replied, "Because I didn't come here to complain. I came here to protect what's left." That night, Traoré sat alone at the camp's edge and wrote a letter. He read it aloud over national radio. "To every forgotten fighter, you may not have proper boots, you may not have clean water, but your heart is cleaner than every suit in Paris. You are the soul of this nation." Across Burkina Faso, people wept, not because of politics, but because someone finally saw them, not as pawns, but as heroes. Even Bako, in his newsroom, whispered to his producer, "I didn't know how deep this ran." The world was watching, but for the first time, they were listening too. A few days after the TV broadcast, Traoré quietly visited Po, a town known for its resistance during colonial times. No press, no cameras, just one soldier, one driver, and the weight of history on his shoulders. He asked to meet Mama Aissatou, a widow in her 60s, who had lost her son, Idrissa, in an ambush near Djibo. She lived in a crumbling clay house. When Traoré entered, she didn't offer tea. She offered a folded flag, stained and torn from her son's coffin. "I don't want sympathy," she said. "I want you to make his death mean something." Traoré knelt before her and took the flag gently. "I carry this now," he whispered. She stared at him for a moment, then reached behind her and gave him a notebook. It was her son's journal. Inside were dreams of a new Burkina Faso, schools for every child, solar lights in every village, farms that fed the nation. "I'll read every word," he promised. As he walked out, she said, "Do not become the leader they fear. Become the one they need." That clip was leaked, and it broke every heart online. 2 nights later, Traoré traveled under full secrecy to Niamey, the capital of Niger. The cameras showed him strong. But the truth? He was exhausted. He met with the transitional leaders of Niger and Mali in a quiet hotel basement. No press. Just real words between men who carried the weight of broken nations. They spoke of food shortages, weapons blocked by sanctions, and the silent war against foreign interests that pretended to help, but deepened the wounds. "What if they all walk out on us?" one general asked. Traoré answered softly, "Then we stand on the graves of our fathers and keep going." Then he pulled out Idrissa's notebook, the journal from the widow's son. He placed it in the center of the table. "Read this. This is why we fight. Not for thrones, not for pride, but for the ones who still believe we can rise." Silence filled the room. No speech, no applause. But one by one, each man opened the notebook and read. And in that moment, 3 nations didn't just shake hands. They remembered why they were born. Back in Ouagadougou, someone finally leaked the raw audio from the live TV broadcast. The whisper Traoré said to Bako. It was clearer this time. "If I fall, France gets the gold. If I rise, the children get a future. Which side are you on, really?" The video exploded. Millions watched it. Not just in Africa, but in London, Paris, and even Washington. TikTok lit up with reactions. People wept. Others reposted it with subtitles in Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic. Young Africans in the diaspora began stitching the video with their own childhood photos, comparing what they had with what kids back home lacked. And Bako, the journalist once full of fire, did something no one expected. he hosted a second show. But this time, he didn't question Traoré. He read a letter, written by his late father, a revolutionary from the Sankara era. If we forget what the land gave us, we deserve to have it taken. Then Bako looked into the camera and said, I didn't believe in this man before, but I believe in what he carries now. The world was no longer watching a politician. They were watching a movement take its first breath. 3 weeks later, a video was posted quietly by a volunteer teacher in Kudugu. No filters, no fancy angles. It showed a dusty field where a group of villagers, students, and soldiers were building a school by hand. No outside contractor, just community work. And then, Ibrahim Traoré arrived. He didn't come with a convoy, just one pickup truck. He picked up a shovel, carried bricks. Then a boy, barefoot and silent, approached him and said, My sister died last year because we had no doctor. Can this school help stop that? Traoré knelt, looked the boy in the eyes, and replied, This school is where doctors are born. The clip caught fire online. Someone added background music. Another translated it to over 15 languages. And then, the camera caught a moment. Traoré handing that same boy a notebook, whispering something in his ear. The boy smiled for the first time in 2 years. It wasn't just a school opening, it was hope laying its first stone. After weeks of speculation, Bako, the journalist, finally released the raw, uncut footage of the moment Traoré leaned in and whispered. The internet held its breath. The audio was clear this time. No music, no cuts. Traoré had leaned in and calmly whispered, You attack me. But if I die tonight, your children will wake up under a flag that isn't ours. Ask yourself, what would your father have done? Silence. And then Bako's eyes changed. The internet erupted. Some said it was manipulation. Others said it was the purest moment of honesty they'd seen from a leader. And for millions, something broke inside. That whisper wasn't about ego. It was a reminder of what was at stake. Mothers began posting pictures of their children with captions like, For them, we rise. A viral hashtag started. What would your father have done? It wasn't just a trend. It was a movement. Late one evening, Traoré released one final video. No suit, no ceremony, just him at his desk, holding a worn notebook, Idrissa's journal. He read one last page aloud. It was a dream the young soldier wrote before he died. One day, we will not need weapons. One day, the children will not beg under the sun. One day, Africa will not ask for help. One day, we will stand tall, not because we are feared, but because we are loved. Traoré closed the book, looked into the camera. I am not perfect. I am not forever. But if you remember anything about me, remember this. I gave everything I had, so the next generation doesn't have to fight like we did. Then the screen faded to black, and one sentence appeared. For Idrissa, for Mama Isa too, for the barefoot boy, for all of us. Your turn, viewer. If this story moved something inside you, if a tear touched your cheek, if your heart raced even for a moment, then you're part of something now. Hit like if you believe hope can rise from dust. Comment the one word Traoré whispered that hit you hardest. And don't leave without smashing subscribe, because the world is watching Africa now, and we're just getting started. This isn't just a channel, it's a revolution. Let's build it together.